Imagine being a guy who's always worked hard his whole life, yet never got any real recognition for it. But then, out of nowhere, an opportunity shows up, and it's nothing less than a sword. But not just any sword. This one's alive, and it actually talks to you. And with it, you finally get the chance to grow stronger in a world where effort alone doesn't really mean much. So, let's dive into this series, which is honestly really good. Let's get right into the video. The story opens with a massive explosion on a mountain, and right there in front of the protagonist, a sword is stuck into the ground. But this wasn't just any sword, it spoke. It asked Leon if he believed himself worthy of wielding it. And for someone who had always accepted the irrational hand of fate, he slowly walked toward it. That sacred sword, which had suddenly appeared before him, declared that opportunities should be given fairly. So, Leon grabbed the sword, and in that instant, he was engulfed by a blinding wave of light. Then, the story takes us back to a little before this moment. In this world, hard work means almost nothing. It's a world ruled by pure irrationality. We see the protagonist in the middle of a duel, losing right after being disarmed. He falls to the ground, injuring his hand, furious that his opponent isn't even taking the fight seriously. He yells, asking if it isn't worth fighting him for real. The opponent replies that no one else in the academy can fight at his level, so yes, he is taking it seriously. Meanwhile, the guy waves at the audience, making Leon even angrier, saying he's just toying with him. The opponent admits he went easy on him, but adds that Leon seems to have improved compared to before. Enraged, Leon grabs his sword again and charges, shouting that attitude is exactly what he hates the most. But the opponent easily blocks every single strike, showing off for the crowd the entire time. Still, the spectators can't help but acknowledge that Leon's holding up well. After all, everyone else had been defeated with just a single blow. Some of them even start wondering if maybe it's because they share the same name. Although Leon, the blonde one, was undeniably better looking, both of them had their names written the same way. And once again, the protagonist loses. Later, sitting in the shade, he reflects on how frustrating it is to keep trying without ever seeing results. It's been 3 years since that blonde Leon transferred to the academy, and no matter how much he trains, he just can't surpass him. Even though they share the same name, the blonde Leon is different in every way. His looks, his personality. It's like he came straight out of some fairy tale. And that story he told about once being a commoner? The protagonist sure it's a lie. The guy must come from a noble family. Then, the blonde Leon walks over, asking if he's okay. The protagonist thinks how much easier things would be if the guy were just a jerk, but he isn't. He's kind. So, he slaps his own hand away, refusing the help. That's when a white-haired girl runs up, shouting Leon's name. Hearing her voice, the protagonist gets flustered and tells the blonde Leon to just leave him alone, turning to walk away. The girl calls out to him, the other Leon, saying she heard everything and that he started another fight with the blonde one again. She asks why he keeps challenging him when he knows he's going to lose. The blonde Leon says that's a bit rude, and when the girl notices the protagonist's bleeding hand, she rushes to him, worried, asking to see it. He pulls it back, insisting he's fine, but she tells him to disinfect it first. Then he snaps, shouting that it's none of her business and that she shouldn't bother with him. Shocked, the girl freezes as he storms off. By nightfall, we see the protagonist still training, swinging a wooden stick like a sword. He thinks to himself that if only he had blonde hair, or a family to support him, or even a master as strong as that guy, maybe things would have turned out differently. In one swing, the wooden sword breaks. Staring at the broken piece, he reflects that, in the end, all he really has is his effort. But in this irrational world, there are far too many walls that can't be broken with effort alone. Then it hits him, today's Leon's birthday. While he's out here training, everyone else is probably celebrating at a grand party in his honor. The protagonist sighs, realizing he's already spent 3 whole years of his life here. Guys, I'm only saying the protagonist because both of them have the same name. So, for now, to make things easier to follow, I'm going to keep calling him that. The protagonist starts crying, saying he doesn't want to give up. But if everything in life is already decided from the start, then what's the point of trying so hard? He yells out to the goddess, asking what the meaning of his effort is and of his life itself. Feeling embarrassed, he mutters that not even a cooking pot would bother answering him. And right then, a bright light flashes across the sky. Someone asks the blonde Leon if he's seen the other Leon, but he says no. Chloe adds that no one from the dorms has seen him either. So, the blonde Leon assumes the protagonist probably went to the party. Chloe starts wondering where he could be, and Leon jokes that she's being unfair. After all, she's spending time with him right now. But Chloe ignores that and says she's going to look for the other Leon anyway. Then, an old man appears behind them, saying it seems that His Highness has been rejected. Leon gets annoyed, telling the old man, whose name is Gilbert, not to call him that, since no one's supposed to know who he really is. Gilbert replies that someone with royal blood is destined to shine no matter what, and wishes him a happy 17th birthday. And well, only one more year remained before the prophecy of the imperial family would come true. The prophecy said that on the day a member of the imperial family of the Great Chloro Empire, overseen by the current emperor, who fears its fulfillment, meets their end, the citizens will witness the advent of Roderick, the ancient Holy King. Leon says that the old man's expectations for him are pretty high, and that they'll only find out if the prophecy is true next year. But until then, Chloe, gifted with incredible magical talent, was already learning level 4 spells. And Leon, the blonde one, who admired the protagonist for his unmatched mental strength, wished to have both of them by his side. The prophecy also stated that on the day a man bearing the name Leon becomes an adult, a sword that destroys evil will descend from the heavens. And with that, the story circles back to the very prophecy we saw at the beginning. The protagonist, Leon, sees what looks like a sword that's fallen from the sky, an impossible sight. But what happens next is even stranger. The sword speaks, telling him to stand up. Leon, not realizing the voice came from the sword, looks around and asks who's there. Then, the sword speaks again, saying it's right in front of him. Leon wonders if this glowing sword, shining as bright as the sun, is really talking to him. He asks if it's a holy sword, and the sword confirms it, saying yes, and that it was Leon himself who summoned it here. Leon has no idea how he could have done that. The sword continues, saying that just as he thought, the world has always been unfair. Those who already have everything end up gaining even more, while those with nothing lose even the little they have. But opportunities, the sword declares, should be granted fairly. Those who don't put in any effort have no right to blame life's unfairness. Only those who set their souls ablaze in pursuit of their purpose are truly worthy. Then, the sword asks, could this Leon, the one who dared to question the goddess of fate herself, truly be worthy of this power? Without hesitation, Leon says yes. He strikes his chest proudly, declaring it with conviction. The sword responds, saying that if that's the case, he should take hold of it, and it will give him the chance to prove his words. Leon walks forward, full of determination, saying he knows exactly what it means to wield a holy sword, but that he can change everything with it. He thinks to himself that his reality is unfair, but still, all the training he's done, never missing a single day, proves how hard he's worked, and that is what's truly unfair. He says that up until now, he's been judged regardless of his efforts, and that he's worked tirelessly to shatter this unjust reality he can't accept. Standing before the sword, he declares that he refuses to let all his determination and effort amount to nothing. The sword then asks why he's still standing if that's how he feels. Leon answers that she asked if he's worthy, and he wants to prove it through his determination and hard work. He adds that opportunities should always be given fairly, but when the sword doesn't respond, he assumes it's rejected him. As he turns to leave, though, the sword suddenly tells him to wait, because he's proven his integrity as a hero. It commands him to draw it now. Leon asks if being called a hero means he's some kind of oracle. The sword replies that it has nothing to do with oracles, it's simply his will. Leon's mindset is so strong that he'd never bow down to any noble family. His determination to prove his convictions, rather than chasing gold or fame, is what makes him truly worthy of becoming a hero. Then, the sword tells him to pull it out once more, saying that this is the right he's earned, the fair opportunity he's been asking for. Hearing that, he grips the sword, and as his hands touch it, the blade introduces itself as Elcid. Instantly, a powerful energy surges through Leon's entire body. The sword explains that it's a clone of the Holy King, Holdrick Chaldea's Alovier, and the blade that guides the light of this era. As Leon holds her, even his eyes are consumed by the sword's immense power. Then, the sword addresses him as Master Leon, commanding him to destroy all evil alongside her. At that moment, the scene shifts to a mysterious figure watching from afar, who remarks that a holy sword and a commoner, together, are starting to make things interesting. He wonders why the prophecy was broken and explains that the name Leon also means lion. And just because the prophecy was passed down to the imperial family doesn't mean it's limited to nobles. The other Leons don't meet the standards, and that blonde Leon, though blessed with talent and destiny, lacks the willpower. That's why he made this decision. And judging by how the sword reacted, it seems she took a liking to this Leon as well. He tells the sword not to worry. This Leon will become an even greater hero than his ancestor, and it's time for those wretched ones to pay what they owe. Then we cut back to Leon, who wakes up in his room, thinking it was all just a dream. But when he glances to the side and sees the sword leaning against the wall, he freezes, realizing it wasn't a dream at all. The sword speaks again, telling him she'll repeat the opportunity she gave him, but warns him not to think he'll grow stronger overnight just through effort. The challenges ahead will be far harsher than the one he's already faced. Those who carry a great destiny must live an equally cruel, if not crueler, life. He may even have to sacrifice the woman he loves or the friends he trusts, because Leon himself chose to walk this thorny path. Leon asks if that's still considered an opportunity. The sword changes into her alternate form, clearly pleased with his answer. She tells Leon to get ready to head to the training room right away and show her how he wields a sword, since she needs to understand his current level before she can train him properly. Leon gets excited, realizing it's a test. Outside, it's still dark. The sun hasn't even risen yet. The sword asks why he's so restless this early. We see Leon trembling nervously, explaining that even though it's almost morning, they're still inside the school grounds. To make things worse, the sword's current form is way too eye-catching, and he has no idea what he'd say if someone bumped into him and saw it. The sword calmly tells him that he's done the absolute best he could in the environment he was given. So, what kind of master would blame their student for not knowing what was never taught to them? Those words ignite Leon's motivation. He grips his sword, eyes full of determination, and takes a ready stance. Then, he begins to attack, swinging his blade over and over, showcasing his swordsmanship, strike after strike, proving what he's capable of. But soon, he realizes something feels different. He's performed these same movements hundreds of thousands of times before, yet now, power is flowing naturally through his arms, all because someone believes he can achieve something. Suddenly, the sword yells at him to stop, and Leon freezes, asking if he did something wrong. The sword explains that if he keeps going like that with a wooden blade, it won't last long. Right then, Leon's practiced sword shatters completely, and Elsa tells him that he's been unleashing power without even realizing it. Repetitive basic training is useful for mastering control, she says, but even she didn't expect someone without aura to possess such strength. Leon asks what she means by that, and the sword simply replies that he doesn't need to know just yet, but warns him that his skills won't improve if he relies on them blindly. She promises to teach him better when he's matured enough to understand. The sword concludes by saying that he's practiced the basics with such seriousness that there's nothing she can criticize. So, the sword said that if she taught Leon how to move his body properly, that alone would be enough. Leon, confused, asked what she meant since they were supposed to be practicing swordsmanship. The sword replied that he couldn't possibly wield a sword without using his hands. Learning how to move the body correctly is the foundation of all martial arts. And even though Leon had trained seriously, this was on a completely different level. Then the sword ordered him to start running, explaining that she was going to test his physical abilities now. Leon asked how long he was supposed to run, and the sword told him to keep going until she said stop, and to also perform whatever movements she commanded while he ran. Leon thought to himself that he was pretty confident in his running skills, but he'd never had to sprint across the training field on one leg or while doing a handstand. Even though he had no idea what purpose any of that served, he didn't care, as long as it made him stronger. Then, that mysterious person appeared again, saying the scene was magnificent and worth painting. He mentioned hearing a rumor known as late blooming. Leon, he said, was like a perfectly shaped vessel. All that was left was to fill it to the brim. Even if he inherited only a fragment of the swordsmanship and experience of the heroes of old, he could still become a master swordsman. However, after 300 years, that mysterious being had no intention of letting his successor stop at the rank of master. In the end, Leon should be capable of slaying dragons with ease. And though he didn't know how powerful the current Demon King was, even half of Leon's potential power would probably be enough to defeat him. Then he turned toward us, the readers, and asked why we looked so surprised. He said his decision was already made, so we'd better watch closely, but for Leon to awaken his full potential, it was going to be like walking through hell. Then, we cut to the classroom, where Leon is completely exhausted, barely staying awake. The sword calls out to him from beside his desk. Leon tries to defend himself, claiming he wasn't sleeping, and the class begins. He uses every ounce of strength left in him to pay attention, but he had spent so much energy on Elsid's physical test the day before that it was almost impossible to stay focused. Still, missing a single lesson wasn't an option. That's when Elsid, the sword, says she's figured out where to start teaching Leon next. She asks Leon what he thinks he's missing, and he guesses, maybe swordsmanship or aura. But the sword says no, it's his eyes. Leon, puzzled, asks what she means, and Elsid explains that the most important things are the eyes, the feet, courage, and strength, in that order. Observation is the most important skill of all. Then comes footwork, followed by courage. Strength comes last. Of course, it's not that strength doesn't matter. It just means the other three are even more essential. Elsid admits she disagrees with a few parts of that philosophy, but she still agrees that the eyes are indeed the most important. Leon thinks to himself that he's never heard of training your eyes before. He wonders if that means his eyesight will somehow improve just by rolling his eyes around. The sword then says that from this point on, Leon is going to learn to see, and she'll show him how useless his eyes have been up until now. Still sitting in the classroom, he wonders what she means by truly seeing. Elsid instructs him to look straight ahead, to use the teacher standing in front of the blackboard as his focal point. She tells him to focus for 10 seconds and memorize what he sees. Leon does as she says, concentrating completely. He sees a dark blue chalkboard, a middle-aged man with gray hair and green eyes, and a wooden pointer in his hand. Then Elsid says time's up and tells him to close his eyes. With his eyes shut, she asks how many lines were written on the board. Leon is caught off guard by the question. She had told him to look only at the teacher, after all. The sword explains that she told him to use the teacher as a point of focus, not to only look at him. Leon tries to remember, but she continues, saying she's sure he doesn't recall. Yet the board was clearly within his field of vision, just like the teacher. She asks if he knows why he can't remember anything about it. Leon admits he doesn't. The sword tells him the answer is simple. It's because he tried to look only at what didn't matter. People waste their eyes far more than they realize. Sure, the brain filters out unnecessary information, but most people never even use their full field of vision. The sword told Leon to focus on his entire field of vision and memorize everything as if it were an image reflected in his eyes, like a drawing. Then she told him to relax his eyes and learn how to see in a broader way. After that, he should focus on maintaining that kind of vision all the time, not just for 10 seconds. Leon, completely focused, thought to himself that he'd like to say this was impossible, but honestly, he expected nothing less from the training of a holy sword, and there was no point in complaining now. Then the sword told him to look at the blackboard again, giving him another 10 seconds. The blonde Leon, sitting nearby, noticed how the other Leon was completely absorbed, wondering what the hell he was doing. After class, we see Leon, our protagonist, totally drained, his eyes and head feeling like they were about to split open. The sword calmly said it seemed things were going well. She explained that the fatigue in his eyes came from them being dry or strained for no reason, but the headache was different. It came from an attribute that had been dormant until now. The pain appeared because something frozen was being released. It wasn't much different from muscle pain, she said. It was like soreness after a workout, a bit different since the brain doesn't feel muscle pain, but still similar in principle. Excited, the sword told him they should keep going with the training, and Leon, fired up, agreed. Then she told him to look at the candles above the wall and asked how many there were. Leon said there were 2, and the sword snapped that he was an idiot. There were 3. Then she asked about the boy and girl who had just walked past him a few seconds ago. Was the boy wearing glasses? Leon said yes. Then she asked if he was wearing a tie. After a while, the questioning continued. The sword asked if the light in the 12th room to the left was on. Leon said yes, so she asked about the light above it. He said no. By the time he reached his dorm, his eyes were aching terribly and he was completely exhausted. The sword said the training had been acceptable for the first day and that it was honorable of him not to have asked for a break. Leon asked if she would have let him rest if he had asked. She said no. He wondered how long it had been since he'd been pushed this far, realizing it had been ages since his mind had felt this weak. The sword said getting used to it meant becoming stagnant, and that there's a limit to how far someone can go if they just repeat the same training over and over. Even if repeating something can be useful, the body eventually finds it easy to perform that routine. Leon asked what she meant by that, and the sword explained that the body adapts to its own methods of training, which is exactly why changing the approach is absolutely necessary. Leon then remembered that strange running exercise she had him do earlier, and it finally made sense. The sword began explaining that humans, depending on how they train and live, develop their bones, muscles, and nervous systems in different ways. For example, Sailors develop a strong sense of balance, hunters a sharp sense of direction, and nomads an exceptional sense of sight. Leon understood that basic training exists to enhance a person's strengths and make up for their weaknesses. The sword explained that his strong points were his stamina, his mindset, and his grasp of basic swordsmanship. But his weakness was the rigidity caused by repeating the same fundamental movements over and over. In other words, he lacked flexibility, both mental and physical. Surprised, Leon asked about aura and swordsmanship. The sword explained that, in the end, swordsmanship is simply the art of wielding a sword. If you can apply the basic movements freely, adapting them to the situation, that's already true swordsmanship. Of course, there are far more advanced styles, but at that point Leon got irritated and asked who would even bother teaching someone who hadn't yet mastered the fundamentals. He felt down about it, but admitted she was right. The sword then said that when it came to aura, there wasn't much she could do, and asked if the other Leon had beaten him using aura. Not only that, but if Leon, the protagonist, suddenly awakened his aura, it would raise a lot of suspicion. So, he could only release his aura once he left the academy. For now, he needed to focus entirely on mastering his eyes and his field of vision. The sword told him that with that alone, he'd probably already be able to defeat the other Leon. Hearing that, Leon couldn't help but smile, overjoyed. And yeah, I'm talking like this because keeping track of both Leons is confusing, but the sword said that probably just improving his vision wouldn't be enough. He'd need to get used to repetitive training, and no matter how hard he tried to see, with all his might, he'd still end up getting exhausted by using the same training method over and over. Leon, hearing that, didn't quite understand what she meant, but he said he had a bad feeling about it. Then he asked what they were going to do, and the sword replied that it was nothing serious, just a small punishment every time he said the wrong word or even asked the wrong question, something that would make him unable to get comfortable with any kind of rest starting the next day. The sword explained that she wasn't staring at him for no reason. It was actually a very effective technique called operant conditioning. Even though Leon had an incredibly strong mindset and willpower, he still needed someone to give him a push. Leon thought about it and realized Elsid was right. It would be impossible not to get punished at the beginning, so he decided to go ahead and test it for himself. He motivated himself, saying he could build resilience through these punishments. Determined, he told Elsid that he accepted the challenge. Then, Elsid gave him just a small taste of what he'd go through whenever he was punished, and the pain that followed was intense. For the record, it lasted 5 whole seconds. Elsid said that since this was the first test, she hadn't quite adjusted it properly, and that next time she'd make it less painful for him. However, she warned that if Leon kept messing up repeatedly, she would increase the intensity more and more. So, he needed to stay focused and do everything correctly. Then she told Leon to rest, because the next day they'd both give it their all. As dawn broke, Leon was already out running for his morning training. In the classroom, the training didn't stop either. He trained his eyes there, and his body when he got home. In the middle of one session, Elsid asked him how many pigeons were sitting on the dorm's rooftop, and Leon replied that there were 10. Then she asked how many pigeons were sitting on the open window, and Leon said there weren't any pigeons, it was a crow. Elsid said that wasn't bad at all for a boy like him, considering it had only been a month of training. Leon got all excited and asked if maybe they could take a little break that day. The sword actually agreed, saying that after a full month of training, they could finally rest. Leon smiled, and while he was celebrating, the blonde Leon showed up, asking if he was doing okay. The protagonist looked at him and said it had been a while since they last saw each other. He hadn't seen the blonde Leon since the training where Chloe tried to help him, and it had also been a month since he'd seen Chloe herself. The blonde Leon said it was just like him to train right after lunch. He explained that he'd come over because he was a bit worried, but now he was relieved. The protagonist asked what he meant, and the blonde Leon said that it had already been a month since their duel challenge. He was worried the protagonist had given up, like everyone else had. But from the look on the protagonist's face, he could tell that wasn't the case. In fact, he was fired up. The protagonist asked if it was really that obvious, and the blonde Leon said yes. The expressions of people who think they can beat him are completely different from his. But he added that it wasn't a bad thing, because the protagonist clearly had way more determination than the others. The protagonist then stepped closer to him and said that was actually good to hear, then asked if that was the only reason he came to see him. After that, he told him to just head back and leave him be. The blonde Leon commented that he was really cold, and suggested they talk for a bit since it had been so long since they'd had a real conversation. The protagonist asked what there even was to talk about, and the blonde Leon said to just give him 10 minutes to continue. The protagonist agreed and sat beside him under a tree. Then the blonde Leon said he was sure the protagonist had already heard the rumor, that he wasn't actually a commoner. The protagonist sighed and asked if they really needed to talk about that, since it didn't seem like the blonde Leon had ever tried to hide it from the start anyway. The blonde Leon looked at him seriously and said that what he was about to say should be taken not as something from a fellow student, but from someone hiding his true identity. The main Leon agreed, and the blonde Leon continued, saying that the only reason he had ever accepted the protagonist's duel challenges was for one particular reason. The protagonist thought to himself that if the blonde Leon had ever refused, it wouldn't have affected him at all. He could have easily avoided the fights and stayed at the top among the strongest cadets. So, the fact that he kept accepting those duels was purely out of his kindness, nothing more than the generosity of the victor. But then the blonde Leon said they should end it. That left the protagonist completely confused. He asked if he really meant to stop everything right there. The blonde Leon clarified that he didn't mean now. He wanted their next duel to be the last one. A fight fought purely through swordsmanship, without aura, just like always. But this time, instead of using wooden practice swords, they would fight with real blades. He added that if he won that duel, the protagonist would have to become his subordinate. The protagonist realized that this was basically a challenge to decide who stood above the other, a declaration of hierarchy, and asked if that meant it was some kind of bet. The blonde Leon said that since it wasn't a magical contract, there was no guarantee the protagonist would keep his word. It was just a verbal promise that could be broken at any moment. But then he smiled and added that maybe that was true for anyone else, but not for the man standing before him. Because the protagonist was too stubborn, too proud, and far too honorable to ever go back on his word. The protagonist asked if that was supposed to be a compliment or not, and the blonde Leon simply said that he'd take the protagonist's word as a guarantee, since he knew he was the kind of guy who'd keep a promise no matter what. Leon then confirmed. If he lost, he'd become a subordinate. But what if he won? The blonde Leon answered immediately, saying he'd give him anything he wanted, as long as it didn't endanger his family's name or honor. Sword techniques, aura mastery methods, even elixirs, whatever he desired. The protagonist agreed and said he'd decide what he wanted on the day of the duel, asking if that was fine. The blonde Leon nodded and told him to let him know when he was ready, since he'd need 3 days to prepare the location. And then, our favorite narrator chimes in. Who will win? Leon, the one chosen by the hero's sacred sword, or Leon, the prince aiming for the imperial throne? This is where the real duel begins. When we return to the protagonist's face, he's visibly nervous. This duel felt completely different from the ones before. The sword asked if he was seriously nervous right now, saying that just moments ago he was talking big to that lazy prince, and now he was scared after coming this far. Leon said it wasn't like that. He just really wanted to know if he'd gotten any stronger. Even though last month's training had been brutal, he still didn't feel like he had improved. Elsid replied that he clearly hadn't noticed it, but he had gotten much stronger, so there was no reason to worry. Vision was a different kind of strength, and of course he couldn't feel it yet, since he hadn't learned how to use it properly. Besides, Elsid said she'd already prepared other training measures for him, so he shouldn't worry at all, and reminded him that he had a physical assessment later that day. Leon groaned, saying he'd completely forgotten about that test. Elsid told him to wait and see, because something beyond his imagination was about to happen, and she bet he wouldn't be able to repeat what he just said afterward. Then we cut to the training field, where the instructor told everyone to line up according to their numbers and start warming up if they weren't feeling unwell. Leon thought back to his last physical assessment. He had ranked 9th. Even though their physical abilities were tested without mana, the top spots were always taken by the nobles. After all, nobles had not only aura but also access to elixirs and professional physical training. So, 9th place was honestly the best he could ever reach under normal conditions. Elsid asked what rank the other Leon held, and he answered, 1st. Elsid said that was expected. It looked like the blonde Leon trained a lot, though probably not as much as the protagonist himself. And now, the first event, even though it was called a short-distance run, was actually 2 full laps around the training field, totaling 800 meters. Leon's time, 1 minute and 20 seconds. Elsa then asked how long it had taken the main Leon to finish his run, and Leon said it took him 1 minute and 40 seconds for a full lap, meaning a 20-second difference. But Elsa told him not to get nervous before even trying, because this time, he had him by his side. Leon nodded, saying he understood, and that now he'd put his full trust in his sacred sword. Everyone lined up to get ready for the race, and the instructor raised the flag, signaling them to start. As soon as the whistle blew, they all began running, but right away, the blonde Leon and the other students noticed something was off. The main Leon was sprinting way faster than before, so fast that he left everyone behind with no chance to catch up. One of the girls even gasped in shock at his speed, and he crossed the finish line in just 1 minute and 29 seconds. That left the blonde Leon and the other onlookers completely stunned. The instructor came over to Leon and asked if, by any chance, he had learned aura. Leon replied that he hadn't. The instructor then said he hoped Leon wouldn't mind if he checked for himself. Leon said of course not, and told him to go ahead. The instructor placed his hand on Leon's wrist, trying to sense if there was any repelling force that would appear when he infused a small amount of aura. Normally, if someone had aura, that essence would immediately react and disperse, but this time, it didn't. The instructor stepped back, saying that Leon truly hadn't learned aura, but he couldn't believe how much Leon had changed in just a few weeks. He asked what kind of training he'd been doing, and Leon simply said he'd only been focusing on the basics, and had also rested, in quotes, a bit more. The instructor commented that Leon's previous training volume had always been abnormally high, so maybe his body had drastically improved after finally resting from years of overexertion. The blonde Leon watched closely, starting to get suspicious that something unusual was going on. Leon quietly whispered to Elsa, asking what exactly had happened to him. Elsa chuckled and said, "Didn't I already tell you?" Leon told him to quit laughing and just answer. Elsa said, before answering, he wanted to know where Leon thought strength actually came from. Leon replied, "Biologically speaking, from muscles." Elsa said that was correct. In this world, most physical training methods focused on increasing muscle size and density, but that was only half the picture. Then Elsa asked if Leon knew about the concept of the nervous system. Muscles, he explained, were connected to neurons, and the strength a muscle could exert depended heavily on the development of those neurons. Muscle density was determined mostly by genetics. There was a limit to how large muscles could grow. Leon had already trained so much that he'd reached his physical limit. So Elsa had focused instead on developing his nervous system. Leon admitted he didn't really understand, but he went along with it anyway and asked how Elsa managed to do that, since he hadn't done any kind of special training. He then asked if Elsa had done something to him while he was asleep. Elsa casually replied that it was all thanks to the punishment he'd been putting him through. Leon's eyes widened in shock, and he shouted out loud, startling all the nearby students who were watching. Elsa went on to explain that he had awakened something inside Leon that had been dormant for over 10 years. And of course, it hurt like hell, as if his muscles were being torn apart piece by piece. That unbearable pain he'd felt every time he failed during training had actually developed his nervous system. Leon demanded to know why he hadn't said anything about this before. Elsa replied that he didn't tell him because if he had, Leon would have only gotten more discouraged. The reason he'd managed to somewhat master vision, Elsa said, was because Leon had been trying to escape that pain. But if he'd realized that pain could actually help him, and that it would pass anyway, he probably wouldn't have pushed himself so hard to learn vision in the first place. Elsa then smugly told him he was free to thank him and started bragging, saying he'd done exactly what was expected of a sacred sword. That arrogance annoyed Leon, who started wondering if maybe his sacred sword wasn't more of a demonic one. He also questioned whether this sword really carried the soul and personality of the great hero Roderick, and if so, then maybe Roderick himself had been just as arrogant as Elsa. As the race ended, all the cadets began cheering, shouting that Leon was incredible, just as they'd expected. He'd broken his own record. In the final results, the main Leon placed second, while the blonde Leon took first place. Elsa told him not to worry, saying it would actually look suspicious if he jumped all the way to first place in just a month. Still, Leon couldn't help but feel happy that he'd climbed from 9th to 2nd place. For the first time in a long while, He actually started believing that he could win. As night fell, Leon asked what kind of training they'd start the next day, and the sword said he'd think about it. His vision training had already gone beyond simple memorization drills, and there wasn't much more he could do in terms of raw physical improvement. So, it would be better for him to gain experience, real, hands-on experience where he could apply everything he'd learned. Leon replied that getting real battle experience wouldn't be easy, and Elcid said that's exactly why he suggested they should leave that place. Leon asked if he could at least learn swordsmanship before that, but Elcid reminded him that he'd already told him to forget about that fantasy. To learn his swordsmanship, Leon would first need to master aura. As he'd said before, basic fundamentals were enough up to a certain level. Martial arts without aura were nothing but cheap tricks. Even if it were a secret technique, it wouldn't be hard to deal with after the first time someone saw it. Once the opponent learned to read those movements, countering them would be simple. Elcid even asked if Leon seriously thought a swordsman as strong as the blonde Leon would ever fall for a mediocre trick like that. The main Leon then asked what he should do, if that was the case. Elcid told him to use his emotions. A sword honed through years of effort carries real power, and now that Leon's physical abilities had risen to such a high level, not even the other Leon could easily beat him. But he still desperately needed real combat experience. Elcid said he should find someone willing to start a fight with him, even simulate a mugging if needed, just to train in real conditions. Leon immediately cut him off, saying this wasn't some slum and there weren't people like that around. Elcid agreed, saying that was exactly why they needed to go somewhere else. The next day, at the training academy, while Leon was walking through the halls, someone called out to him, asking if he was the commoner named Leon. When he turned around, he saw 3 guys who clearly wanted trouble. Leon immediately noticed from the badges on their uniforms that they were nobles. They started shouting angrily, saying that a mere commoner had taken second place and didn't know his place. They accused him of using tricks and deceiving even the instructor, saying that they wouldn't be fooled like everyone else. Elcid spoke to Leon through his mind, saying that even after 300 years, there were still idiots like that around. Leon replied calmly, saying that if they had a problem with the rankings, they should complain to the instructor, not to him. That only made the nobles angrier, saying they didn't know what kind of trick he'd used. They went on to say that a bastard like him, who hadn't sworn loyalty to any family yet, had been suspicious from the very beginning. They said he was finally showing his true colors and demanded to know which family he was backing. Leon thought to himself that these idiots clearly weren't listening to anything he said. They probably never intended to talk peacefully. To them, he was nothing more than an annoying weed they wanted to pull out. Then, another noble descended the stairs, saying no one should be upset, because even though Leon was just a commoner, they all studied at the same school, but Leon should at least find the punishment they were about to give him somewhat honorable. As he approached, the other nobles brightened up, praising him as expected of the pride of the Bubbin family. Elcid asked Leon if that guy was the leader of the group and if he was from a major royal bloodline. Leon answered that he was Wellmont, the second son of the Bubbin family. He was always second place in the physical exams, so he was probably furious that Leon had just stolen that spot from him. After all, before this, the only person ahead of him had been the blonde Leon, but now he was losing to both Leons. Then he stood face to face with Leon, and Elcid couldn't help but notice that the behavior of nobles bullying the weak, and the weak pushing back, was the same as always. Elmont said he regretted that their first meeting had to be like this, and that Leon was probably feeling wronged, but they couldn't simply overlook what had happened. Therefore, Leon should at least accept his proposal. Leon replied that he wanted to hear the proposal before agreeing to anything, which made the other nobles call him arrogant. But Elmont simply raised his hand, signaling them to be quiet, and said they would fight under the supervision of an instructor. Leon thought to himself that it might sound like Elmont was being fair by suggesting an instructor, but in reality, it put him at a disadvantage. They hadn't said anything about not using aura, which meant Elmont could use it freely. And if Leon objected, they'd probably claim he was trying to deceive the instructor. If he refused the duel altogether, they'd just slander him in another way. Looking around at the crowd watching the commotion, Leon noticed the blonde Leon standing among them. He thought that if it were him, he could definitely get Leon out of that situation, but then again, that would be pathetic. Asking his rival for help would be the same as begging, an even greater humiliation than losing to those idiots. So Leon agreed to Elmont's proposal, but with one condition, that the instructor supervising the match would be Instructor Elmont. Seriously, this Manhwa story is amazing, but they really have zero creativity with names. It's kind of hilarious. Leon asked Elmont if he accepted, and Elmont, realizing that if Instructor Ewim Mulet oversaw the match, he wouldn't be able to pull any tricks, accepted the condition. He said he didn't care who supervised the duel. He only regretted not being able to beat Leon senseless until he was satisfied. Later that night, Leon realized he never expected to gain real combat experience in this way. From a results standpoint, it was actually great. He asked Elsid what he thought and whether he could win without using aura, since he had never fought anyone who used it before. Elsid told him he'd show him how to make things easier. Hearing that tone and seeing Elsid's suspicious expression, Leon immediately got nervous about what he meant. Then Elsid said that this method should be the easiest, and a panel suddenly appeared in front of Leon. The screen displayed all sorts of information: class title, level, and skills. Leon asked what it was, and Elsid explained that it was basically a guide showing what Leon could and couldn't do at the moment. Not only that, it also showed Elmont's stats, the noble who had challenged him. Elsid explained that he wrote those stats based on his own understanding of their strength, so it wasn't perfectly accurate. It was just for Leon to get the idea. Leon saw that Elmont was a bit weaker than him, sitting at level 15, while Leon himself was level 18. The only thing he lacked compared to Elmont was aura, and since Elmont was the second son of a noble family, he had probably consumed plenty of elixirs and undergone intense training to strengthen himself. But even if someone drank a ton of elixirs, if their body couldn't absorb them, they were nothing more than nutritious drinks. Not to mention, his training couldn't possibly compare to what Leon had endured. So if he couldn't use aura, Elmont was basically a ranker within those power standards, and Leon could easily surpass that limit. Thanks to Elsid's guidance and his own relentless training, Leon could take on those idiots even without aura. In other words, when it came to physical ability alone, none of them could hold a candle to Leon. If not for aura, the fight would be simple. The real problem was the aura itself. Realizing he actually stood a chance, Leon said that from now on, he'd aim for the top, not the bottom, and there was no way he'd lose to someone like Elmont. But then he noticed his title said, "A hero who can't use aura." He asked Elsid why, and Elsid said if he didn't like it, then he should just get stronger. The next day, as Leon calmly walked through the school corridors, he suddenly came face to face with Instructor Elmont. Elmont said it looked like Leon had changed a lot in just 1 month. He explained that he came to stop Leon in case he started acting recklessly, but it didn't seem like that would be necessary. Leon replied that he wasn't sure what Elmont meant, and the instructor said he was just pretending not to understand, but still wished him the best of luck. Leon asked what exactly he meant by that, and the instructor told him to go teach those idiots a lesson. Hearing that made Leon grin, and he walked confidently toward the training arena, full of determination. As soon as he entered, one of the nobles shouted, asking how he dared make them wait. But Leon ignored him completely and simply told the instructor that he was ready to start. The first match was against Jeff Henry. The instructor reminded them that both were putting their names and honor on the line, and that he would personally serve as the witness. Before starting, he asked Jeff what he wanted from this duel. The noble answered that he wanted that commoner to admit his crimes. When the instructor turned to Leon and asked what he wanted, Leon said he just wanted this to be the last time they ever bothered him. The instructor handed them wooden swords and told them to take 1 step forward. Meanwhile, Chloe and the blonde-haired Leon were watching from the sidelines. The real issue was that with aura, even a wooden sword could cut through flesh, putting Leon at a major disadvantage. Elsid asked Leon if he wanted to check that guy's status, but Leon said he didn't need to, that he was fine. He thought to himself that no matter how strong that noble was, he was still just one of Elmont's underlings, so it wasn't worth borrowing Elsid's power to deal with someone like him. The noble charged forward, swinging his sword diagonally from the upper right to the lower left. Leon noticed that the move was so predictable, it almost felt like a trap. But as the noble closed the distance, Leon couldn't help wondering why the guy looked so slow. With a single clean strike, Leon stunned him instantly, leaving the instructor shocked, along with Elmont, Chloe, and even the blonde Leon. A head wound like that shouldn't have ended the match in one blow, but Leon realized he had unintentionally knocked him out with just a single attack. Yet while lying on the ground, the noble shouted that he hadn't lost. Dizzy and humiliated, he insisted he'd only made a mistake and demanded a rematch. The instructor said Jeff had lost and wouldn't tolerate any more nonsense, but Leon said it was fine, they could fight again. The noble smirked, saying that since Leon knew his place as a mere commoner, he'd fight for real this time, and he wouldn't hold back. Elsid told Leon not to finish the fight in one strike this time. As the duel restarted, Elsid noted that this was Leon's first time using his vision in a real battle. Since that idiot volunteered to be his training partner, he should have realized that Leon, by ending the previous fight in one hit, was actually holding back out of mercy. Once the battle resumed, the noble charged again, swinging repeatedly without rest. But Leon blocked every blow effortlessly, his enhanced vision allowing him to see everything. The movement of his opponent's arms, legs, even the dilation of his pupils, predicting each next move before it happened. Elsid then explained that since Leon could now identify the starting motion of an opponent's attacks, he could predict what would come next. At that moment, the noble lunged again, but Leon blocked easily, though one swing barely grazed his back and hair, leaving a small cut caused by the aura-infused blade. Leon realized the noble had begun using aura, but he wasn't concerned. He could still read every movement clearly. The noble yelled for him to dodge if he could, swinging faster and faster. Elsid observed that the noble's attacks were reckless and desperate. He was throwing one strike after another without any control over his stamina. Typical amateur behavior from someone who didn't even understand how to pace himself in battle. Even though aura could enhance physical abilities, it still had its limits. So Leon quickly spotted an opening and struck the noble's leg, leaving him furious for having been hit by such a clean attack. Jumping back, the noble sneered that Leon was a fool and said he should have finished him off right there. But now, he wouldn't be able to land another hit like that again. However, before he could even finish his sentence, Leon launched a relentless barrage of strikes, hitting him over and over until the noble could barely stand. When it was over, Elsid calmly asked what Leon thought about that. Leon replied that it was just as Elsid said. When it came to using his trained vision, a moving target was way better. Beaten and bruised, the noble fell to the ground and admitted defeat. The instructor then declared Leon the winner. Chloe and the blonde Leon celebrated his victory, while Elmont and his companion looked shocked and furious. Later that evening at the academy, there was only one topic of conversation: Leon's duel and his victory. He had defeated every noble who challenged him, and now only Elmont remained. Even the students began wondering whether Leon could actually win against him. As Leon walked alongside Elsid, the sword commented that all those opponents had been incredibly weak. Their swordsmanship looked refined, but none of them had any soul behind their swings. He couldn't even believe they were at that level despite being aura users. Leon replied that today's match would be a little different, because it was finally Elmont's turn. Elsid reminded him that the most important thing was to never let his guard down. With that, the two walked toward the arena. They stood face to face, and as soon as Elmont began to radiate his aura, even before the match started, Leon and Elsid immediately realized that Elmont had stopped underestimating him. Since Elmont used aura, he was physically stronger than Leon. On the status screen Elsid showed, there was something new about Elmont: a sword vision. It was only at level 1, so it probably wasn't too powerful, but unknown techniques were always the scariest. There was even a small chance Leon wouldn't be able to read his attacks through his own vision. Elmont smiled, saying he never thought his turn would finally come. Leon simply looked at him and said he already knew this would happen, which made Elmont even angrier. Leon reflected that Elmont would be the perfect opponent to prepare him for his future duel against the blonde Leon. Even though Leon's physical strength was incredible for someone without aura, he was still weaker when aura was factored in. And if Elmont was at a level where he could fully infuse his weapon with aura, even blocking a strike with a wooden sword could be dangerous. In that case, Leon thought, he'd have to avoid a direct confrontation and lure him into a trap instead. But as soon as the instructor signaled the start of the battle, Leon barely dodged a slash that sliced through a lock of his hair. A thin cut appeared on his face, a result of pure sword energy. It was practically a long-range attack. Leon realized he couldn't fight like this. The difference in speed between them was enormous. He reminded himself that Elmont was a direct descendant of a count's family, even if he was an arrogant fool. Elmont looked at Leon and started laughing, saying it was no wonder the other nobles lost to him. He even admitted that if Leon had been just another arrogant commoner, he would have crushed him long ago. But if Leon was someone worth recruiting, then things were different. Elmont said that if Leon joined him right now, he'd forget their rivalry entirely. Hearing that, Leon charged forward without hesitation, swinging his wooden sword straight at Elmont's face. Elmont narrowly dodged, but just like Leon, he ended up getting a shallow cut across his cheek. That small injury made Elmont furious. He shouted that Leon had grown arrogant just because he'd gained a few useless abilities. Leon grinned and said that was exactly right, and if Elmont didn't like it, he could come and do something about it. Elcid, hearing the words useless abilities, immediately interrupted him mid-battle, clearly offended. He asked if that idiot had really just called his techniques useless. Leon confirmed it nervously, already dreading how Elcid was going to react. Elcid muttered that people say even mountains and rivers can change after 10 years. Yet here he was, 300 years later, being mocked by a brat who probably still wets the bed. Seeing how angry Elcid was, Leon could feel an almost tangible sense of menace radiating from him. Then Elcid asked if Leon could see that kid with the perfect white teeth. When Leon replied yes, Elcid said coldly that, as his student, it was his duty. If by the end of the match that boy's teeth were still in his mouth, Leon would face serious punishment. Feeling Elcid's fury, Leon realized 1 or 2 teeth wouldn't be enough. He'd have to knock out as many as possible. Elmont, staring at Leon, noticed his sudden shift in energy and couldn't quite understand what that sensation was. Then Leon charged at him, and the two began exchanging strikes. But to everyone's surprise, Elmont was the one being pushed back, forced onto the defensive. The crowd watching was shocked that he was retreating. The blonde Leon, however, said that wasn't the full picture. Sure, Leon was on the offensive, but Elmont hadn't been thrown off balance completely. In the middle of the duel, Leon wondered if he might be pushing too hard, and thought that, if it weren't for Elmont's aura, the fight would have been over already. The blonde Leon observed that if things continued this way, the battle would soon devolve into a deadlock. Elmont, visibly irritated, shouted that Leon was way too stubborn, telling him to know his place and stay down where he belonged. Leon shot back that he's the one who should know his place, and kept attacking fiercely. He thought to himself that he'd make up for his lack of raw strength and speed by relying on Roderick's vision. If he could predict Elmont's movements just a bit faster, he'd be able to compensate for his inferiority. But to do that, he had to see much, much faster, and on a wider scale, until his opponent's movements looked as if they were happening underwater. Leon kept trading blows with Elmont, successfully blocking one of his strikes. He was thrilled that his plan was working, though that only made Elmont even angrier. Elmont demanded to know if that guy really couldn't use aura. The instructor, watching closely, could sense no aura from Leon, but still couldn't believe that he was pushing Elmont back. Elmont suddenly started laughing, saying he couldn't believe he was being forced to use that. Then he began channeling his aura into a skill known as arcane fencing. Leon immediately tensed up. That ability could pull, slice, or even strike from a distance. In short, it was completely unpredictable. He couldn't afford to waste even a second. Elmont lunged toward him, and Leon, trusting his instincts, barely managed to dodge the attack. But Elmont quickly recovered and went for a feint, aiming a stab toward Leon's side. That technique relied on the assumption that the opponent would dodge, meaning the hit was guaranteed through their reaction. It was the secret technique of the Bubbin family, known as the Crescent Strike, and it was headed straight for Leon's chest. Even if he tried to dodge, his ribs would definitely be struck. He knew he wouldn't be able to fight with broken ribs, but his trained vision allowed him to see the blade's trajectory, even if he couldn't completely avoid it. Then, just as he thought about the possibility of losing, a surge of electricity wrapped around his body. He yelled at himself to move. His foot slammed into the ground, and he flipped backward, narrowly evading the attack. The display shocked even Elmont. Leon then counterattacked, landing a clean blow on Elmont's shoulder. He followed it up by striking Elmont's left arm directly. Chloe gasped, saying it looked like Elmont was now at a disadvantage. But the blonde Leon said to ignore the injury. The shock of having his family's arcane fencing technique fail was probably far more damaging. Elmont knew Leon was about to gain the upper hand, especially since Leon still had both hands ready for a frontal strike. But if Leon went for it, the wooden sword's durability would reach its limit. It had already taken too much damage from Elmont's aura. Seeing that, Elmont smirked and charged forward again, shouting that Leon had been dancing in the palm of his hand this entire time. Then Leon, using only one hand, slashed upward at Elmont's other arm, forcing him to drop his sword. Without giving him a second to recover, Leon struck again, this time hitting Elmont right in the mouth and knocking his teeth out. The crowd erupted in chaos, cheering wildly, while Chloe and the blonde Leon smiled proudly at Leon's victory as the instructor officially announced him as the winner. Elsid was absolutely delighted, praising his disciple as incredible, saying he'd done a great job and that the kid would think twice before running his mouth again. Leon, however, wondered if that boy's attitude would actually improve or just get worse after this. Elsid then said he was truly impressed and revealed that Leon had just unlocked the gates of acceleration, progressing far faster than anyone had anticipated. Leon asked what exactly this acceleration ability was supposed to be. Later, while walking and feeling a sharp ache in his shoulder, Leon asked Elsid to explain more clearly what he meant by acceleration, specifically about that moment when he dodged Elmont's arcane fencing. Elsid asked if Leon had ever experienced times when his body moved slower than his awareness, and especially moments when, in that heightened state, his reflexes outpaced his own conscious thought. It wasn't about raw speed. Elsid asked why. Then, trained swordsmen could move faster. Leon answered that it was because they could use aura. Elsid said he was half right. Without aura, a person's body couldn't handle the strain of its own power. Normally, only those who'd already mastered aura could achieve true acceleration. But Elsid told Leon that he had managed to use acceleration before even learning aura, and that he had unconsciously applied it only to his legs. Even though it was incomplete, it was still incredibly impressive. It meant that Leon had managed to surpass his natural limits purely through willpower. Leon pointed out that Elsid had said anyone who couldn't use aura wouldn't be able to endure such strength, yet he felt fine. Elsid explained that this was precisely because Leon's execution was incomplete. If he'd used acceleration through his entire body instead of just his legs, his internal organs would have been completely torn apart. Then Elsid told him it was about time, that he needed to take care of his body for now. Confused, Leon asked what he meant by that, and what time it was. That's when a wave of pain suddenly surged through his body, spreading violently, especially through his legs. Elsid calmly told him to brace himself, that what he was feeling was intense muscle pain. Leon screamed from the pain, and Elsid told him to be grateful he got to experience it after using acceleration, warning him never to use it again until he learned aura. Otherwise, he'd probably die. Sometime later, back at the academy, Leon walked casually through the halls while everyone around him whispered about his incredible duel. Rumors spread across the entire school, with wild theories claiming he was a secret weapon from the royal palace, or that he'd learned arcane fencing from a mysterious swordsman. Leon quickly realized those stories were probably started by the nobles themselves to justify their defeat. While walking, he suddenly crossed paths with Chloe, who greeted him warmly. The two of them ended up sitting together on a bench outside, away from everyone else. Feeling a little nervous, Leon asked how she'd been and joked that she was supposed to be in alchemy class right now, asking if she was skipping. Chloe called him an idiot, saying she'd never skip class, and explained that their alchemy teacher was sick. That was why there were no lessons that day. She mentioned that something about him seemed different lately, that Leon had been avoiding talking to her directly. On top of that, he'd suddenly started picking fights with nobles, and both she and the blonde Leon were really worried about him. Feeling a twinge of guilt, Leon wondered how long it had been since he'd been able to talk to her so openly and comfortably. As he thought about it, he realized he finally understood his feelings toward her, and how jealous he'd been of the blonde Leon always being by her side. That jealousy had only fed into his own inferiority complex, making him believe he wasn't anything special at all. He hated this world, hated the fact that all his hard work never seemed to pay off, and he blamed himself for it. But thanks to the Holy Sword, even that part of him had changed. Chloe kept talking, saying that after all those fights, everyone at school wouldn't stop talking about him. Now, there were even rumors going around that he'd used some kind of magic sword to improve that much. But when Chloe turned to look at him, she suddenly noticed Leon was crying. Startled, she asked why he was crying out of nowhere, explaining that she was only talking about what people were saying, not trying to insult him about the magic sword thing. Leon quickly told her it wasn't about that it wasn't anything like a magic sword, leaving Chloe a little confused. Inside, Leon was thinking that, even though Elsid could be rude and had an awful personality, he was the one who'd pulled him out of the depths of despair. At that moment, the hero, the being whose memories Elsid carried, grew annoyed, muttering that he couldn't believe Leon called him someone with a bad personality. After all, Elsid was carrying the hero's personality too, meaning the two were essentially the same person. Still, Leon thought to himself that if a hero was someone who saved the world, then his hero would be Elsid, because Elsid was the one who had saved him. That was why he wanted to become a hero strong enough to live up to his master's expectations, and even surpass them one day. The hero watching all of this said he didn't really know what was going on, but it seemed that kid had somehow managed to grow just by talking with a girl, something even he, a so-called perfect being, couldn't quite understand. But that was fine. Both he and Elsid didn't care about the reason. What mattered was that Leon was finally becoming worthy of being nurtured, shaped into someone entirely new. And of course, with all that excitement, Elsid's aura began to flare, radiating such intensity that Leon was left completely stunned once again. Later that night, lying on his bed, Leon reflected on how much he had truly changed. He thought back to the end of his conversation with Chloe, how she told him he seemed so much better now, no longer nervous or closed off like before, and how he could finally look straight ahead. He was still the same Leon, but something inside him was fundamentally different. Now, instead of looking up, he was looking forward. She'd also mentioned that it would be nice if he could talk with Leon a few more times, since, aside from him, there wasn't really anyone in their class who could be honest with their feelings and genuinely stand by her side. Leon said he'd do that, but now, alone in his room, he whispered an apology to Chloe, thinking he probably couldn't keep that promise because the next duel would be his last. Meanwhile, the blonde Leon stood quietly out on a balcony, also lost in thought about the upcoming fight. The next day, Leon resumed his training, and once again shattered another wooden sword from overexertion. Elsid thought to himself that wooden swords wouldn't even be suitable for training once Leon reached his full state. Aside from perfecting the technique itself, the skill was so powerful that it required complete control and attention over his weapon. Training swords were much weaker than real ones, so Leon had to be careful. He told Elsid that he'd only need to succeed once, because a trump card could only be revealed one time. And it was obvious that if he used the same move again, a genius like the blonde Leon would counter it easily. That meant he had to evolve beyond his own techniques, to read and anticipate what his opponent was thinking in order to win. Elsid remarked that Leon was probably still frustrated after seeing the blonde Leon's status window. Basically, the blonde Leon's level was higher, and all of his physical stats surpassed the normal Leon's. On top of that, he had more skills and an impressive class title. But what frustrated Leon the most was the fact that the blonde Leon, being an intermediate aura user, could already wield an energy sword, channeling his aura into his weapon. In other words, he was even stronger than most of the instructors, a level of mastery that even talented knights usually only reached after turning 30. Leon, looking over the window panel, says that even though he falls behind in strength and speed, he's still a bit better when it comes to stamina. Leon comments that his opponent is definitely tough, but not someone he can't beat. Elsid says that's a good mindset to have, and that he'll give as much advice as he can whenever possible. So Leon should use that mentality as the foundation to prepare himself to win this duel against Leon. Then Leon seriously asks Elsid what would happen if he ends up losing to Leon, what Elsid plans to do after that. If that really ends up happening, of course. Elsid says he's not going to answer that, and Leon asks why he wouldn't. Elsid continues, saying that this is a test for him, and that he already mentioned before that the trials he would face would be harsher than any opportunities he'd receive. Leon says that this is a really difficult test for a first one, but Elsid says this fight could become the turning point in Leon's life. And if he manages to beat Leon, he'll explain everything, so it's better for him to convince himself why he said that after the explanation. So Leon keeps training there until sunset, And later that night, while it's raining, we see the blonde Leon inside his mansion. That old man who appears says the results are better than expected and that he knew the others weren't that bad, but he didn't expect that commoner to defeat Elmot. The blonde Leon tells the old man, whose name is Gilbert, that it seems like he knows people who are above average, because he remembers Gilbert once saying Leon had far more potential than his evaluations showed. Gilbert says it's already been 3 years since he said that, and for the right person, that's not a long time. And since Leon managed to defeat the second son of a Count family without using aura, beating someone who can, that means they don't need to doubt his potential anymore. The blonde Leon says he got a message from the other Leon today, saying he was ready. And with that, the blonde Leon says that before the battle begins, he wants to ask Mr. Gilbert for a favor. In his thoughts, he says he'll definitely defeat the other Leon and make him his best knight. And he also thinks about Chloe. The next day at the castle, Leon walks slowly through the halls, saying someone up in the sky must be preparing a fight for him, since it's pouring rain outside. Elcid says that's normal, since the hero of the sacred sword is putting the future on the line, so of course the sky would react too. Then Leon meets with the instructor, and he says the time has come. The instructor explains that the blonde Leon made a request, and that request was basically for the two of them to fight alone, with only one witness. Unlike Elmot, Leon doesn't want to humiliate the other Leon, because, unlike him, he has honor. Just one spectator and one witness, nothing more. Elcid says he gets the whole picture, and Leon, in his thoughts, wonders if he already knows who it is. Elcid says it's probably Chloe. Leon asks why in the world the blonde Leon would call Chloe to watch the match, and Elcid says it seems like he doesn't get what's going on. The blonde Leon believed the other Leon liked her, so he probably intended to use this fight to prove he was worthy of her too. Elcid says there are lots of cases where the king and his subordinate fight for a woman, and that if he wins that duel, it would show he's the most honorable one there. And if he wins, Leon will become his subordinate, and just thinking about the blonde Leon using Chloe for that already starts making him really angry. Leon remembers that, if he loses, he'll become the blonde Leon's subordinate, and he says that the reason is good enough for Chloe to become a spectator, because that way, he'd be drawing a very clear line of who would be leading and who would be following. And that makes Leon furious, and he imagines exactly that. But Leon is, in reality, a true high-class noble. Someone who tries to manipulate people's relationships and emotions. It's a political tactic that never treats others as equals. And just thinking that this is the path of a noble makes Leon extremely irritated. He says he's disgusted by it, and his sword senses that Leon is angry. Leon thinks to himself that the guy should have never tried something like that against him, and he walks toward him, saying he's going to teach that fool a lesson. So, with the two of them standing face to face, the blonde Leon says he's late, and Leon replies that, actually, he's the one who's being hasty. And man, to make this easier from here on out, I'm going to say Leon for the protagonist and Leon for the blonde guy, because this is getting way too confusing, alright? Leon then asks Leon where the observer is, since he knew he had brought someone there. Leon answers that the person is somewhere Leon won't be able to see them. After all, it wouldn't be fair if one of them made a mistake because they were distracted. Because Leon didn't want Leon to have an excuse when he defeated him. That makes Leon a bit relieved, seeing that Leon didn't intend to use Chloe as bait. Leon says then it's time to begin, but Leon answers that before that, he needs to take something. He takes out a pill and swallows it, and Leon asks what he just took. Leon replies that it's a pill that suppresses aura. And even though he said he wouldn't use aura, sometimes it can slip out unintentionally. And since the agreement was to fight without aura, he took it just to be safe. Then, both of them grab their swords and stand directly in front of each other. And Leon notices that, unlike their previous fights, Leon is completely serious. But when it comes to focus, Leon definitely wasn't going to fall behind either. Then the instructor tells them both to begin. In the very first clash, Leon ends up receiving constant pressure from Leon, forcing him straight into defense. His sword keeps trembling non-stop from the impact, and Leon immediately rushes forward again. He starts unleashing a barrage of attacks without stopping, pushing Leon completely into a defensive stance once more. Leon thinks to himself that he really believed he'd gotten stronger. But if this fight kept going like this, he wouldn't last even 30 seconds if he kept taking those attacks head-on. So Leon takes a controlled breath right there, making his attacks even more concentrated. One of the strikes ends up coming right at him, but Leon blocks it with his sword. And he notices that Leon's blade felt like a whip when he released that strike. Leon was definitely on a completely different level compared to Elmot. And even though he was using Roderick's vision, Leon's figure looked more blurred than any opponent he had fought so far. But Leon reminds himself he needs to calm down, because the incomplete parts of the image could be compensated with all the experience he gained fighting him so many times before. So once again, the two of them begin trading multiple blows non-stop, and Leon's butler, watching everything, wonders if this is really a duel between students. And for now, even without using aura, their swordsmanship and battlefield awareness might already be better than that of actual knights. Leon smiles, saying Leon really is strong, a real monster. And Leon also smiles, seeing how much stronger Leon has become, wondering when he managed to reach this level. Leon's servant says that kid is seriously strong. He knew how incredible his lord was, and even then, that kid was keeping up with him. Then Leon throws a double feint toward Leon, but in the middle of the attack, Leon manages to read his movement. So, both Leon and Leon whip their swords at each other, and a slash appears across Leon's clothes, along with a chunk of his hair being cut off. After that hit, Leon becomes extremely irritated and thinks to himself that he was already wondering why the following attacks after the first one didn't feel as powerful. And then he realizes Leon intended to turn this into a stamina battle from the very beginning. That makes him question whether he fell right into the protagonist's game. Leon thinks to himself that he needs to get closer to the enemy so he can drain his stamina and then slowly begin turning the fight in his favor. Leon, on the other hand, reflects that he can feel Leon's desperate desire to win, and no matter what happens, he needs to break that desire first, because if he doesn't, Leon will never submit and become his knight. His attendant notices that he's using an arcane technique from the Imperial family, and that technique basically uses muscles and blood flow to let the user draw out strength far beyond normal limits. And even if it isn't complete, since Leon can't use aura, half of its power would already be more than enough. So Leon activates his vision to the absolute limit, and the two of them charge toward each other. Leon realizes that hit was extremely shallow and wonders if Leon really dodged it. But what actually happened is that the strike landed straight onto Leon's arm, making Leon question again if he truly wasn't using aura. Then his sword speaks into his mind, telling him he wasn't using aura at all. It explains that the human body is far stronger and faster than most people imagine. And even though there are techniques that enhance the body by focusing on speed, like quick steps, there are also techniques that boost strength or endurance. Leon should forget his common sense. And while he's talking with his sword in his mind, Leon suddenly appears right in front of him, ready to strike. Leon wonders if he really had the guts to get distracted in front of him and asks if he's truly that calm. Leon says he could say the same, since he's only using arcane swordsmanship now. But in his thoughts he admits he's not calm at all. He was nearly at his limit, and he had lost his flow because of the sudden interruption from Elcid and his sword. He remembers his own words about not trying to judge what can be done with common sense. And then he realizes that Elcid didn't interrupt him at all. In fact, he actually helped him, since it only takes around 5 or 6 steps before he's pushed out of the ring, meaning Elcid had been driving him back this whole time. So, once again, he grabs his sword and points it at Leon, while Leon's attendant says the whole atmosphere has completely shifted. But even so, there shouldn't be any way to advance against his lord's rapid steps. Leon then thinks to himself that he already expected he'd only have one real chance to win, which was to endure the attacks. That way, he'd protect his stamina advantage, patiently waiting for Leon to exhaust himself. But the worst possible option he had so far was acceleration, a technique he couldn't even control, and he says that this wasn't fun at all. And, unlike before, he seems much calmer as he draws his sword. He reflects that the only thing he needs to trust now is the strength he's been building up, and Leon notices that this is the first time Leon has ever looked this big standing in front of him. Leon starts smiling and says he wouldn't expect anything less from someone who might be worthy of becoming his subordinate, and he thinks to himself that he absolutely needs Leon by his side, no matter what. Then, once again, he activates his rapid steps, and the attendant analyzes that, If he keeps using those steps without aura, he's probably already far past his limits. Even Leon whistles, almost impressed, and then Leon says that if he's truly a hero, then this amount of effort shouldn't mean anything, while Leon starts thinking that Leon really doesn't understand the decisive difference between them. He was born with natural talent, while Leon had to swing his sword every single day, and once again, the two charge at each other, clashing head-on. Out of nowhere, a broken blade comes flying through the air, and when the next panel shows up, Leon is standing on one side, while Leon is on the opposite side with his sword snapped clean in half. Leon asks how he even did that, and then Elsa appears, saying that his hard work was finally rewarded. What decided the duel was basically the hint Leon learned from Helmet's Rising Strike, an unconventional sword technique that disrupts the timing of the upper body. But the biggest factor in determining the outcome is that the number of swords they've broken in training is vastly different, and because Leon is so talented, his physical body can't surpass its own limits, meaning he won't be able to match him in that regard, since Leon knows the breaking point of a sword because he's pushed one to its absolute limit countless times. So Leon points his blade at Leon and tells him he won, wearing the satisfied smile of a true victor. Then Leon's attendant confirms it and declares that the victory really belongs to Leon, while Elcid thinks to himself that if Leon had actually lost, he would have become Leon's subordinate too, and that would have been unbelievably irritating for him. So Elcid asks what he requested as his reward since he also earned one. Leon says that, thinking about it, there isn't really anything he needs, and Leon responds by saying he lost. And since this fight was something he willingly agreed to, he'll have to accept the consequences, emphasizing that a promise is a promise, then asks Leon what he wants. Leon says he'll tell him later, which annoys Leon, but Leon explains that he doesn't have anything in mind right now, so once he thinks of something, he'll tell Leon. Leon is completely stunned, realizing Leon isn't even a little bit greedy, and he says that's fine then. After the battle, Leon notices he managed to finish without using acceleration, but it still feels like he pushed himself way too hard, especially since his opponent was Leon. Then Chloe arrives, using her healing light, saying that this magic will grant rest to the wounded. She starts healing Leon, and Leon says he already feels lighter, just as expected from a rank 4 healing spell. Then he thanks Chloe both for the healing and for acting as today's observer. But Chloe suddenly starts crying, saying she can't understand Leon or Leon at all. There wouldn't be any problem at all if Leon lost, since she would still think of him the same way, but she's also genuinely happy that he managed to get stronger. So Chloe asks if he was planning on leaving the academy, right? Leon then asks how she already knew that, and Chloe says she knows Leon like the back of her hand, and she knew he was an ignorant fool. Leon starts laughing, saying he was worried Chloe might try to stop him, but Chloe answers that she can't believe he has the nerve to say that when he never planned on listening to her in the first place. She says Leon has always been like that, always pushing past the limits people thought were impossible to break, and, in the end, he somehow did it anyway. And even though it took him a bit longer this time, he still managed to pull it off. Leon replies that he actually thinks he did it pretty quickly, considering the difficulty, but Chloe says he took forever, and then the two burst into laughter. Leon starts walking away, saying he's fine now, and asks Chloe to go beat up Leon for him. Chloe says she should be healing him instead, because even if he doesn't show it, he's probably depressed and shocked right now. Leon then says that getting smacked by a girlfriend he listens to would make this defeat fuel for his future growth, and that he'll leave Leon in her hands. Chloe, hearing that, asks Leon what he plans to do after dropping out of the academy, and Leon, still walking away, says it's a secret for now. With nothing she can do, Chloe just falls silent and starts praying for him. Elcid says he never expected to see a mage who doesn't believe in gods praying for someone. Leon says she really is a good person, and then Elcid asks if he's finished everything. Leon answers yes, saying he's excited to become someone special. He desperately gave his all in everything he did, wanting to become someone who wouldn't lose to either one of them. But he wasn't able to overcome barriers like social status or innate talent in the end. He lost his way in front of those two exceptional people because he felt he wasn't good enough. But when he met Elcid and began evolving, he freed himself from that inferiority complex carved deep in his heart. And that allowed him to step out of the shadows and see those two as friends instead of enemies. Leon then says that now it's time for him to become a hero. And since that's his destiny, who could possibly be more special than him? Elcid says Leon is incredibly materialistic, and Leon asks if he's disappointed. Elcid says he isn't, because there's nothing wrong with wanting wealth and honor. He explains that ambition is a core part of human life, and having dreams is what pushes a person forward. And unless you go down the wrong path, ambition is exactly what makes humans human. And that's precisely why Elcid chose Leon. The person who was originally meant to become the hero at the beginning of the prophecy wasn't the original Leon at all, but Leon himself. Leon is stunned, and Elcid continues, saying that the legitimate son of the imperial family, Clyde, the sword that would build a corrupted empire once again, would be Leon Callum Gladius von Clyde. He was designated as the hero 150 years ago. Leon says he'd be the perfect guy for that, although in his thoughts, he's confused because, based on what Elcid said, Leon wasn't supposed to be the protagonist. But he also asks Elcid if he didn't say this fight was supposed to be a test for him. Elcid says that's exactly right, and that Leon did well, because there was never any rule that the hero has to be someone chosen by prophecy or oracles. Becoming the predecessor of someone's future with your own strength and willpower is also something a hero does, and the other Leon is wrong about that part. Elcid asks if Leon, by any chance, was feeling guilty for stealing his opportunity or something like that. But Leon answers that of course he isn't. It's not like he was lacking anything compared to Leon. So why would he ever feel guilty towards someone who was born with a silver spoon in his mouth? That was impossible. He even emphasizes that it was his own fault for losing to someone like the protagonist, who is Leon. Besides, it was Elcid who chose him. The soul of the great hero, Roderick, and the sacred sword Elcid both chose him. So, if anything, he's just living up to their expectations. And that answer leaves Elcid very satisfied. Then, the next day, Leon requested to withdraw from the academy, and, well, his instructor was extremely sad that he was leaving to become an adventurer. He said he'd write him a letter of recommendation instead of giving him a graduation certificate. And also, the fight against Helmut's clique pushed the other commoners to work harder and start training seriously to surpass all those stuck-up nobles. And now, because of that, he probably wouldn't need to come back to the academy ever again, and he tells Elcid that it's time for him to become an adventurer. The first destination would be the free city, Blind, where adventurers gather. And this is where Leon's story truly begins. Then we simply see a hawk flying across the sky, soaring over countless trees inside a forest, and someone rushes out from within it. And when we see who it is, it's Leon sprinting desperately, dropping to his knees and crying, saying he was finally free from that maddening forest. He says he can already see Blind from here, and that he'll finally be able to sleep in a real bed after leaving the academy 15 days ago. Elcid tells Leon he should be grateful that the forest became a testing ground for him to train in, and Leon says he's extremely grateful, so grateful, in fact, that he burst into tears the moment he escaped it. Then it's explained that, 15 days ago, Elcid and Leon decided to enter that forest on the way to Blind. He camped there for the first time, and goblins attacked him constantly. Under those harsh conditions, Elcid allowed him to use the sacred sword instead of a wooden one. He had prepared that sword before leaving the academy, and, drawing it from his grasp, he cut through the goblins with relative ease. And thanks to those 15 days he spent in the forest, he grew accustomed to wielding the sacred sword and training with it. But even then, Elcid pointed out that he had taken an extra week longer than expected, and Leon, thanking him for the training, mentioned that those goblins had been giving him trouble from the very beginning, while Elcid added that Leon had managed to cut down 7 of them in less than 10 seconds. And even though he had been able to pull that off, it was only because of the footwork training Elcid had drilled into him. Leon realized that, yeah, he had become way stronger than when he first entered the forest, so, if it was for the sake of his dream, he thought to himself that he wanted to wipe out every monster from tomorrow onward. And Elcid said that he seemed pretty excited, but still, Elcid told him to save that energy for when the time was right. He reminded Leon that he was still a jar in the making, and that he needed to keep getting stronger by defeating monsters, slowly filling that jar. And he also warned him that no matter how much he tried to fill a jar that wasn't finished yet, it would end up leaking and all his effort would go to waste. And Leon said he would remember that. And with that, we move a little further ahead in the story. Leon finally arrived in a city filled with residents, and he said he was really happy that he managed to get through the security gate. pointing out how much the public trusted an academy student ID, and Elsid added that, by the way, this city was actually a bandit village, which left Leon completely shocked, and Elsid explained that cities like this had existed since 300 years ago. It wasn't small, but it wasn't exactly big either, and compared to its size, it was pretty disorderly, and the security there wasn't great, so Leon needed to be careful. And then Elsid asked where he planned to go, wondering if he wanted to find an inn. Leon said that first. He wanted to look for a guild, since it would be better to register as soon as possible while they still weren't in a hurry, and Elsid asked if Leon didn't plan on becoming an adventurer, and Leon explained that being a mercenary would also work, but compared to an adventurer, it didn't seem like he'd get much freedom to move around, and he had no intention of getting tangled up in the power struggles of nobles. What mattered most was using the privileges of a hero, since he believed adventurers could take requests to eliminate monsters, which felt perfect for him. And Elsid said that his hero seal would take some time before it got cleared, and Leon also revealed to us that, besides training in the forest, he had learned a lot about Elsid. He found out why Elsid had descended a year earlier than the Oracle had declared, and he also mentioned that most of Elsid's authorities, like a sacred sword, were sealed, and normally, the owner of a sacred sword would have a body that recovered so quickly it was nearly immortal, while also gaining immense strengthening, with enough power to withstand the fatal damage of existing demons, and as a bonus, they could become even stronger by multiplying their aura and holy energy, and Leon thought that for someone like him, who lacked aura, being able to use a sacred sword through his magical power would be ideal for getting stronger. So Leon ended up registering for his adventurer seal, and a girl confirmed his academy enrollment along with the instructor's letter of recommendation he had brought, and if Leon registered as an adventurer, he would start at rank D, which was ideal for taking real jobs instead of random tasks, and based on the instructor's letter, that kid would be able to rise to rank C pretty quickly if he showed good results. The girl explained that he would need to be at rank B to prove he could actually use his aura weapon, and it would probably take some time before he reached the core of the guild's forces at higher ranks like A or S, and Leon couldn't believe that an aura weapon should depend on a rank requirement like that. And well, aside from the levels where someone could simply circulate aura, an aura weapon was the stage where a person could control their aura outside their body. For example, a sword that could split rocks and slice through steel would be the true beginning of becoming superhuman. And thinking that reaching that level was only allowed at rank B, just how strong would someone at rank A or S even be? Elsid then spoke inside Leon's mind, saying that this was a far more interesting organization than he expected, and it seemed like there were many humanoid races around. So Leon looked around and saw a whole group of different people, one of them from a canine race, another from a feline one, and others like elves, for example. So, werewolves, elves, and even high elves, and Elsid couldn't believe they were working alongside races that had been fighting each other 300 years ago, and whoever created that organization must have been extremely capable. The girl then asked if something was wrong, and Leon, feeling awkward, said no. So she told him that, in that case, his registration was finished, and if he wanted to be officially recognized as an adventurer, he would need to complete one mission without any kind of reward, meaning he'd have to do a job completely for free. So to earn recognition from the guild, he had to pay that price, and in the middle of the city, down in the sewer area, we saw Leon fighting humanoid rats using his sacred sword, and he even mentioned that it was his first time fighting rats with a sword, and Elsid said that Leon's swordsmanship in direct combat was still inferior since he didn't have much diversity in his attacks, and to get past those guys, he just needed to keep cutting them down. He also said there was no better training than cutting through all kinds of enemies, whether they were land beasts or even flying ones, and Leon commented that this didn't sound like the kind of advice he expected from a sacred sword, and Elsid replied that there was no helping it, since the mission he picked was literally to clean out the sewers, and the rats kept attacking Leon. But Leon took all of them down easily with his sacred sword. But then he told Elsid to look at that guy in the back of the nest, asking why that one had a horn even though it was still a hatchman, and Elsid explained that it was an evolved species, and Leon asked what he meant by evolved species. They were basically creatures that had lived a long time as monsters or had gained some special power by absorbing tons of resources, just like hobgoblins. So Leon immediately asked what he needed to watch out for. Elsid explained that the proof of its special ability was the horn itself, and the bigger the horn was, and the more horns it had, the more dangerous its secret ability would be, and Leon asked if there was a way to know what kind of ability it had, and Elsid said it would be good for him to experience it at least once for himself, because unfortunately, that particular rat's ability was useless. But just like us, Leon didn't understand what Elsid meant by that. So Elsid clarified that the ability was a curse, and when that rat saw that Leon was holding a sacred weapon, a sword no less, it decided to attack the sword directly with the plague curse. But the attack just snapped against the blade, and Leon immediately started bragging, saying it didn't work, pointing out that today the little rat had the bad luck of meeting the wrong opponent, and he told that rat to hand over its horn as he charged straight at it. So later that night, Leon went back to that girl and handed her a sack full of tails from those creatures, and even she was shocked when she saw that it weighed 23 kilos. And just so you have an idea, with some simple math, that meant he had hunted a total of 230 of those things. He also handed over 4 horns, saying they were hatchman horns, and since he ended up hunting around 200 of those creatures, 3 or 4 horned hatchmen showed up, and he asked if he could sell those too, and the girl, clearly surprised, said that of course he could. That would total 13 silver coins and 50 copper, and Leon said it was way more than he expected, and the woman explained that hatchman horns were actually pretty expensive and had extremely high demand, and she added that Leon was the first person to ever bring back that much on their very first mission, and she was genuinely impressed. Leon, completely embarrassed, thanked her for the compliment, and she explained that she would have already been surprised if he had hunted even one hatchman. But imagining that he managed to take down 4 of those high-level creatures made her think he must be really good at using aura, especially for someone so young, and she told him he was amazing, making him even more flustered. Then she congratulated him and said that, from that moment on, he would be officially registered as a rank D adventurer of the guild, and she explained that the seal on the copper emblem symbolized the free city of Blaine, and Leon asked if he could use it anywhere, and she said yes. But adventurers at rank B or lower would only get secondary priority when taking jobs from other branches, which was basically a measure to prevent people from accepting only the requests they personally liked, and Leon said he understood, realizing that this item was proof that he was no longer just an academy student, but a proper adventurer. The girl then said that if Leon ever wanted to make a request, she would be happy to help, and even though she didn't have much authority, she could still assist him to some extent, and Leon replied that, in that case, he wanted to ask for a favor. And then, later that afternoon, we saw Leon standing in front of a clan, and Elsid started laughing, saying that the receptionist probably mistook Leon for a holy knight, and Leon asked why, and Elsid explained that people used to say holy knights of the past kept their identities a secret before being officially appointed, and they would go on a journey to help others. But since the hero was also a type of holy knight, she wasn't entirely wrong, and in the future, she would probably faint when she found out that Leon was going to become a hero, and someday, in her old age, she would brag that she was the receptionist in charge of the hero, even becoming something of a legend in the Adventurer Guild in a few decades. Her fame would be so great that she might even write and sell autobiographies, and Leon said that if he was going to help people while also training and growing stronger, that would be very good for him. And since he was planning to live in blind for a while, helping people with low-paying missions and doing good overall was infinitely better than living under suspicion. And he was thinking about leaving only after reaching rank B, and Elsid was stunned by that, and Leon asked how long it would take to reach that level, and Elsid said 100 days would be enough, which obviously shocked Leon, and Elsid explained that he originally wanted to take it easy and teach Leon for 6 months, but that wouldn't work. And even though this was part of his training, he couldn't believe his successor would waste time cleaning sewers just to rank up, which was unacceptable, leaving Leon confused about Elsid's logic. Elsid then declared that, from this point on, Leon would become as strong as possible in that time frame and defeat at least one dragon during that period. Leon says that, to kill a dragon, the jump in monster difficulty is just way too big, but Elsid tells him that, now that he's learned the basics of vision and footwork, he'll raise his proficiency through more real fights. One of the privileges of a hero is that he can absorb the power of any monster he defeats, and, basically, he accumulates that power. So, after some time, we see Leon taking down more of those sewer rats and absorbing their power. He realizes this is the connection between monsters and aura that Elsa told him about. Leon knew that, before, the elixirs and training methods used by prestigious families were genuinely effective at developing aura. Elsa explains that, honestly, anyone can absorb a monster's power and convert it into aura. But the royal nobles of the past sealed away that truth, so only they knew how to do it. And now that the main people who hid that truth are dead, only Elsa knows it. And why did he figure it out? Because he became more capable of subjugating monsters. Basically, a dragon would equal 1,000 of those rats. But, of course, the Ratman version, meaning the horned ones. But Elsa says that not even 1,000 Ratmen would be enough. Once Leon becomes more familiar with the process, he'll be able to hunt stronger monsters and, eventually, go after dragons. Leon asks if he's actually being serious and not just messing with him. Elsa answers that of course he's not joking. The Holy Sword isn't a cleaning tool, so it doesn't make sense to use it to scrub the city sewers. And, well, basically, Leon had asked Elsa to purify him every time he got out of the sewers, meaning this whole thing left him a little bothered, right? But he also asks Elsa why he's so fixated on hunting dragons specifically. Elsa explains that the reason is because they'll need to head to the Titan Mountain Range in the future. Leon says that's a dragon territory he would never dare to enter, since it's land ruled by the laws of the giant kings. He even asks why. In the past, Elsa went to the demon realm, a place countless kingdoms failed to conquer. Did he also want Leon to go there? Elsa simply answers that he'd definitely be able to help him through the entire process. He explains that his body was left in that area and he lost his memories, so he doesn't know much. But they should make it their goal to reach those lands within 6 months. Leon asks if he wants to go to that place specifically to recover some fragments of his memory, since he has no idea what that place even is. Elsa says everything will be fine. It's not like they won't prepare before heading there. Leon just needs to be able to protect his own body and then trust Elsa to handle the rest, since he is the Holy Sword. Leon says he'll trust him only because nothing has gone wrong so far, so he's counting on him. Elsa then says it's time to start hellish training, and that word hellish scares Leon quite a bit. Some of the city's citizens started calling Leon a cat, since he subjugates ratmen almost every single day. Well, there are already tons of rumors claiming he's stacking up a mountain of ratman corpses every day. So, because he became famous for hunting ratmen, his guild nickname ended up becoming Cat. Then, when Leon goes to the receptionist, he hands over the treasure, and she comments that the amount is smaller than usual, and Leon agrees a bit awkwardly. He says he didn't find many ratmen, and the ones that did attack him were very few. And, well, basically the ratmen are getting scared of Leon. Even if they seem dumb, they have a bit of intelligence, and that's why he wants the receptionist to check out other missions for him. She says she knew this day would come, so she handpicked 4 missions for him. Leon, then, looking closely at the documents, notices that they look extremely old. Elsa even says that it probably means the mission isn't popular at all, and also that it has never been renewed. Intrigued by that, Leon decides to take the mission, and the first one is called Rocky Slime Hunt. Their habitat is found underground near the outer wall, because they basically eat rocks. And if they live there for too long, then the walls themselves wouldn't last very long. The mission comes from Blaine's defense captain. So Leon goes up to one of the guards and hands it over, and the guard tells him he never requested anything like that. That leaves Leon confused, and he says that can't be right, since it's an official guild mission document. He says it must be a mistake, and right then another soldier shows up behind him, asking if he's that cat, the adventurer who cleaned up all those sewer rats. Leon says that's him, and the guard tells him he was amazing and that they needed more adventurers like him. He even adds that most guild members only go for easy jobs and still want to call themselves adventurers. It was ridiculous. So Leon heads down toward the mission site and starts remembering the conversation. Depending on how well he does the job, he'll be rewarded more, so he should work hard. Leon even says that the way the guard talked made it sound like something pretty difficult to deal with. He also notices that, even though it's not as dirty as the sewers, the ground is still really damp and slippery. If someone doesn't use proper footwork down there, they'd have trouble just staying on their feet. Elsa even says it's the perfect job for Leon to train his legwork, and Leon asks him to wait a second. He notices 3 tiny monsters nearby, but Elcid, irritated, tells him to use his vision. If they were normal slimes, adventurers wouldn't be avoiding them. So, when he finally activates his vision, a rock shoots straight at his face, and he dodges by a hair, but that rock, even though it was small, cracks part of the wall. Leon didn't even see where it came from. He just barely dodged it, and Elcid immediately yells at him to look forward. A little monster jumps at him, and Leon draws his holy sword and slashes at it, but its body is so tough that his blade bounces right off. And that's when Leon understands why these monsters are called rocky slimes. Elcid then says Leon probably already figured it out, but a slime's weakness is its core. If the core in the center is destroyed, he can destroy the entire slime, no matter what kind of skills it has. But these slimes come with one small problem. There are countless rock fragments mixed inside the stone slime. That means layer after layer of armor protecting that core, and for a monster, that was extremely well thought out. Elcid explains that it's no wonder adventurers want to avoid them, since blunt weapons would work while breaking through a slime's defenses, while swords and arrows would easily cut or pierce them. However, the rocky slime compensates for those weaknesses with its stone fragments. It becomes a monster that's just difficult to handle with weapons. And then the slimes start pulling rocks into their mouths and fire them straight at Leon. Leon, using his sword, starts deflecting everything, and the slimes charge right at him. And, well, because of the next impact, a few stones end up hitting Leon, leaving him a bit injured. Elcid says the slimes know he can't dodge every attack, so they're aiming for his vital points. So what was the analysis of that attack from earlier? Using the vision Leon just activated? Leon explains that they're firing rock fragments from more than 5 meters away. That gives them a bit of time before they shoot again, almost like they're taking turns. So, if Leon closes the distance right at that moment, he might be able to land 1 or 2 strikes. The biggest problem was that he still couldn't break through the slime's defense, so he needed to figure out a way to dodge the fragments and cut the core. But maybe that wasn't the only answer. Maybe he needed to slice through them altogether. By using his vision, he could look for the moment when the rock fragments weren't paying attention to the slime's body, then use the holy sword to pierce the empty space. The issue was that the rock fragments were constantly shifting, so finding that opening wouldn't be easy. But then Leon smiles and says that a crisis could also be an opportunity. Elcid comments that the moment the rocky slime creates an opening to launch the stones, its mucus flow should also pause for an instant. And, based on Leon's capabilities, there wouldn't be any other moment for him to precisely destroy the core except that one. Leon says he really thought that far ahead. Looking right at the stone slime, Elcid says of course he did, because he was incredible. So Leon says alright, draws his sword, says he'll give it a chance, and charges at them using his vision. The moment he activates his vision, he destroys the core of one of the slimes, and he immediately thinks that, if he missed the timing even for a split second, he would have been hit at point-blank range. So he goes straight for the next one and cuts it down as well. And Elcid comments in their shared thoughts that, since the slimes detect their surroundings through vibration, Leon needs to reduce the pressure he puts on the surface as much as possible while moving. And since Leon has the footwork technique, the advanced stepping method, he was definitely capable of doing that. So Leon starts advancing and dodging the attacks, and he reflects that he can actually do this. Like Elcid said, it's possible as long as he uses the footwork techniques. But, at one point, he slips on those rocky stones, and when he looks to the side, several rocks are already flying toward him. However, he regains his footing and dodges them by a hair, and then he spots the last slime's core. He rushes it, and simply pierces the core with a thrust from his holy sword. That completely destroys the monster, and Elcid says he doubts Leon did that consciously, but it's fine. In the end, the technique worked. Leon then asks what he's talking about, and Elcid explains that he just used level 2 of the footwork technique. It turns out Leon really used it by accident, and he's stunned, and Elcid keeps explaining that finding the balance between flat ground and reducing both vibration and sound is the foundation of level 2, and that, if there are other things on the ground, he should be able to use it as well. Meaning, this advanced technique would let him move on icy ground or even on scorching terrain. Basically, being able to use the environment as part of his power is the main point of the footwork technique. By doing that, he'd become adaptable enough to move even in a completely unfavorable environment. And even if it happened by luck, for a moment he shifted the position of his legs to lower his center of gravity, and by doing so, he abandoned his upright stance and became able to flexibly move in any direction he wanted. He points out that if the environment changes, then his posture should change as well. Up until now, Leon had only used the stance designed for flat ground movements. In a place with a low ceiling and wet floors, he needed to move in a way that fit the terrain. Leon says that a lower stance definitely makes his movement feel more comfortable. So Elcid says that his training is letting him make exceptional progress thanks to him. Leon then says Elcid is a demonic sword, which irritates Elcid. Leon starts thinking that this is only level 2, so he can't believe this is considered beginner level. Then Elcid says that now that he thinks about it, Leon shouldn't even be able to dodge those attacks until he gets a bit more used to the footwork technique. He says Leon won't die just because he gets hit by a couple of little rocks, so it'd be better to practice the way he takes hits, reducing the damage, and then use that experience in an actual fight. He says Leon will need to use his body to deal damage, but he won't be able to block everything. He also tells Leon not to rely entirely on bursts of movement, and that if he finds the perfect timing and manages to slice them, then he shouldn't use bursts if there are 2 or fewer enemies. Basically, what he's saying is that Leon should get hit on purpose and then use his technique after taking the hit. Leon gets irritated and asks if Elcid wants him dead, calling him a demonic sword again, and Elcid says it's all for his own good, because if he gets too comfortable fighting, it'll only make things harder for him in the future. Then the other slimes show up, and Leon says he wasn't comfortable at all because of Elcid's brutal training. But Elcid says that by his standards, Leon is way too comfortable, and he starts talking about how people used to push themselves back in his time. So, after spending some time there, we see several soldiers gathered around, and one of them mentions that it's already the 3rd week now, asking what time he came in today, and another soldier answers that he showed up at 10 in the morning, before the second shift change, which makes the soldiers comment about how he's really working way too hard for someone his age. And at first it didn't even look like he'd be able to take down that many stone slimes. But today he's climbing back up with bags completely full. The problem is that the rewards aren't even that great for all the effort he's putting in. But then he finally walks out of there with 2 full bags of items and tells the guard that today was his last day, saying he cleared out the areas near the wall, and since slimes reproduce way slower than rat men, they wouldn't need to put out another subjugation request anytime soon. So he hands over the last fragments of the rocky slimes and asks them to notify the Adventurers Guild that the mission is done before heading off. He then asks if, by doing all that, he was finally ready for Elcid, and Elcid answers that he was, saying that, using the power they built up from subjugating stone slimes, he now needed to take his first step and learn about aura, and later on, at the end, Elcid explains that he evolved way faster than expected, and at first he only hoped he'd absorb a decent amount of power, since rocky slimes are organisms made of mana. But, thanks to the fact that nobody accepted that mission for such a long time, it actually turned out great for them. And now they're a whole month ahead of schedule, meaning Leon reached the minimum amount of power needed to start working with aura, and Elcid points out that he was pretty late to learn aura compared to others, asking if he was ready for that. Leon, without even hesitating, says of course, and he remembers to himself that descendants of prestigious families, like he once was, received a baptism where their circulatory systems opened the moment they were born, establishing the foundation of their mana with elixirs, which is why social status created such a big difference in natural talent. And developing aura without a baptism had been practically impossible for his past self. But Elcid adds one more thing, saying that if someone who went through the baptism tries to unclog a circulatory system blocked by impurities, there's a real chance that the person might not survive the shock. But Leon, in this case, had a real shot because he had absorbed mana all this time. And most importantly, he had Elcid, the Holy Sword, and the power of the Holy Sword would protect his circulatory system and heal his wounds at the same time. But he'd still have to endure excruciating pain to make it happen, and if he passed out, the baptism would fail, and whether he succeeded or not would depend entirely on his inner strength. So Elcid immediately begins casting a spell, creating several blades of light in the air, then throwing one straight at Leon's back, hitting him. That makes him scream in agony as electricity shoots through his whole body, and more blades keep being launched non-stop at Leon. And while it strengthens him, it also tears him apart completely. And Elcid even says it's impressive that he's withstanding 10 light blades, though though Leon is obviously completely wrecked, practically on the verge of death. And Elsa notices that, as Leon's aura awakens, it seems like the presence of the people who were hiding in that city becomes even clearer, and soon Leon begins to feel the aura, sensing the flows circulating outside his body, with a refined power flowing through his heart. Then Elsa heals him, and Leon says it feels like he gained a different kind of pouch, aside from his physical abilities that could increase, and that he feels like he can do anything now, but Elsa tells him he's mistaken. At that moment, the hero's soul appears and says the kid really is incredible, and even though the reason he was chosen was his inner strength, he still surpassed expectations. But he asks his sword why she looks so sad. He already said that training would make everything work out, since the stronger the hero becomes, the better it would be for her. But Elsa tells the soul that the problem is that he did two things wrong, and the soul even used a shortcut to place him inside the Holy Sword. And the Holy King gets a bit embarrassed, but reminds her that he's the one in charge, and that his successor would be Leon. So, Elsa should have kept that opinion to himself, but he says he's going to turn Leon into an incredible knight, and that his idiot king should just watch from the heavens while he does all the work for Leon to surpass him. And then he turns back to Leon and mentions that he honestly thought Leon would only endure about 5 blades, saying he only used the baptism to unclog the wide vein. But if Leon wants to use aura properly, he's also going to have to train his narrow vein, since he was still a kid overflowing with a small amount of power, but he had a long road ahead, and Leon says he knew that, though he thinks to himself that even without any changes to his physical abilities, he could feel that energy flowing through his body, and he now had this strange sensation like he had nerves outside his body. Elsa says that's the sense of aura, and that if he focuses on using that flow, he'll be able to analyze everything around him, and Leon says that sounds amazing. So Elsa tells him he knows he's happy to finally have aura, but first he needs to actually explain what aura is. Basically, there are 5 common attributes usually seen in humans, those being elements like wood, fire, beast, metal, and water, but Leon's attribute wasn't in any of those 5, and Elsa was a bit surprised because Leon ended up getting the same type of aura as his sword. Leon is shocked and asks if it's really the same, and Elsa says that's right. He has the attribute of sun, light, and heat, a high-class attribute that represents splendor and magnificence, and Leon gets all excited knowing he has the same aura type as Elsa. But Elsa says they first need to summarize things so they can get to the main point. Then he shows Leon's system, where his class title changes to Hero who finally learned aura, and now he was level 22. And on top of that, his skills also leveled up a lot, which makes Leon realize how different he was from before. And besides that, he had just learned aura and was already at level 3. And Elsa explains this is because Leon managed to use accelerate even before learning aura, which is why he was already well above level 1 or 2. And beyond that, his martial body also increased to level 2 after his meridians were opened. Now, Elsa says he'd like to teach Leon the remaining swordsmanship he lacks, which gets Leon even more excited because he can finally start learning the swordsmanship of the great hero Roderick, and he tells Elsa to start right away, and Elsa comments on how excited he is. But he also points out that being that pumped up is 100 times better than having no motivation, though there was something Leon needed to know first, and that was the fact that the city they were in happened to be where their enemies lived. Leon is stunned, and Elsa continues, saying that somewhere in that city he could feel their presence, the presence of the hero's arch-nemesis, the traitors who were trying to fulfill a purpose by handing this world over to beings from another realm. As he says this, Elsa starts getting angry, calling them insects and mediocre traitors, and Leon asks what their name was. But Elsa says that would be a waste, that they don't even deserve the effort of having their names spoken, though if Leon wanted a name for them, he could call them the evil group. Elsa tells him that now that he has aura, he can stand against them, and Leon asks if that's the case. Then he just needs to get even stronger, right? Since he already decided he'd become a hero, and Elsa says they'll probably stay quiet for now. But it's not like Leon has all the time in the world, and they'll likely start moving in at most 2 months. And subjugating monsters is nothing more than preparation to get even stronger, but malice is an enemy the hero cannot avoid, and from here on out, Elsa will have to crawl through the mud covered in blood and animosity. So, after some time, Leon goes out to look for more missions, and that girl tells him the guards had mentioned what happened, but she was worried since she hadn't seen him for 4 straight days, and Leon apologizes for making her wait. And as she looks at him, she says there's something different about him now, and Leon explains that he kind of had an enlightenment while subjugating monsters. The girl, all cheerful, says she knew it, and it seems she even had another reason to congratulate him, and Leon asks what she means by another reason. So she hands him a rank C badge, congratulating him on his promotion, and Leon asks if he can really be promoted just like that, since normally you need a separate evaluation for that. But the girl explains that usually that's true. Yet his subjugation results against the Ratmen and Rocky Slimes received really high ratings. So, thanks to commendation letters from the Lord and the Captain of the Guard, he ended up promoted, and Leon gets all happy because he only completed 2 missions and already ranked up, and Wesley says it's not bad for the kid, and that if he can take more requests thanks to that promotion, it'll be even easier to track down Malice. Leon then asks if he can already start accepting rank C requests, and the girl says yes, that he can start right away, and she thinks to herself that he's already looking for new requests right after being promoted, which made her think he must be a holy knight, totally on a different level. But that's nothing more than Elsid interpreting what he assumes she's thinking, though it kind of seems true, since holy power is really similar to sun aura anyway, and Leon asks if there's any request he should take, and Elsid replies that there seem to be a few good ones for training, but he doesn't see anything related to Malice. The problem is that Leon, without realizing it, ends up speaking out loud instead of communicating mentally with Elsid, asking if they shouldn't focus on training until they find some leads, and the girl, awkward and confused, says that if he wants, she can show him requests from another category, since taking only rejected ones must be tiring, and Leon says that's not what he meant, and after getting a bit embarrassed, he asks if she can show him requests related to slums or shady areas. That completely shocks the girl, since the slums are filled with horrible people, and while slums are usually where the poor gather, the slums in Blaine are a bit different, since there you can find thieves, informants, convicts, fugitives, smugglers, assassins, and all kinds of people. It was an area where the men living there had broken laws from multiple countries, and Leon thinks to himself that if it's a large-scale lawless zone, then that place would be perfect for evolving and also for picking up clues about Malice. But the girl simply says there are no requests related to the slums, surprising Leon. She explains nervously that jobs for that place are handled by mercenaries, not adventurers, because adventurers don't get involved in human disputes. And, well, most of the disturbances that happen in the slums are between people. And unfortunately, Leon couldn't become a mercenary full of restrictions after coming this far. And if he went there to investigate the slums without reason, he's sure everyone would start watching him with suspicion. So the girl hands him a request and asks if this one would work. It was a subjugation of phantom armors in an abandoned mansion.